Doctors and nurses of Reddit, despite knocking before entering a patient's room, what's the strangest thing you've walked in on a patient doing? Working in neuro/psych, the strangest thing I have walked in on was a fully cognitive 18-year-old male having sex with his biological mother. The sex was consensual and they both seemed to be enjoying themselves. However, needless to say, the mother was denied a private presence and given limited visiting hours after that. That mother effer. I admitted this elderly bedridden patient who had a daughter with him. She claimed she was his caregiver. I was about to find out how true that was. I'm at the desk when he goes into VFib. We bust in there with the cart, ready to save this dude's life. We throw the curtain back and this lady is jacking off her dad furiously while he lay in the bed just having died. We coded him but to no avail. After the code, my charge asked what she was doing. Her response: whenever he gets worked up it's the only thing that calms him down. That was my first experience with not being able to even. Had a guy in his late teens/early 20s constantly masturbating. Everyone walked in on it. It was on a floor where the patients were separated by curtains too. Looking back, I think he was an exhibitionist and he was making us all subjects to his masturbatory fodder, so that was fun. Woman giving her husband a blow. Except that she was the patient in the burn unit, admitted after a flash fire from pouring lighter fluid on her barbecue. All the hair on her face was singed off, her face was super swollen and red, and we had caked on antibiotic ointment all over her face to treat her burns. Talk about sloppy head. What can ya say, the guy's got a ghoul fetish. At a retirement home for elderly folks with severe dementia, there's this one guy that is always silent, but cheery. Always smiling, waves when you acknowledge him. One day, out of the blue, he stops me in the hall and raises his finger toward a room with the sternest scowl I have ever seen. He says, in the deepest, most movie trailer narrator voice I have ever heard in person, This is the room. Upon entering the room, I found that he was directing all of the wandering residents into this room, and had like 4 people crammed into this little studio unit. Dementia patients are great. My great-grandmother woke up thinking that it was 1985, which was sad, and that I was her dead husband, which was even sadder. Once we convinced her that it was 2014 and I was her great-grandson, she asked me if I would dance with her. I said yes, and went to play some music on my phone. I turned on Bill Haley and she called it yuppie crap and demanded I play her disco. She was born in 1930. I walked into a quadriplegic gangbanger with the worst pressure ulcers I have ever seen. Lower back and both hips had bones completely exposed, septic wounds, all of them. Getting a lap dance from his underage girlfriend who was topless, rubbing herself against his flaccid, Foley catheter penis. I stood there for a second, turned around and closed the door trying to understand what I had just seen. The girl got dressed and walked past me as fast as she could, and when I entered the room again, the patient just said with a grin, "She missed me, doc." I walked into a quadriplegic gangbanger. I misread this as, I walked into a quadriplegic gangbang, and it blew my effing mind. First internship in a geriatric ward. Me and a fellow student walk into a patient's room, who is screaming like crazy. He was known for having serious dementia. We open the door and my student colleague gets a warm handful of shit thrown right in his face. Needless to say, I was quite surprised, but happy I missed the brown rocket. OBGYN checking in. Meth addicted man going down on girlfriend. One day postpartum. Think Walking Dead. Heroin addict injecting into her IV. Preterm labor patient with dilated cervix at 24 weeks having what can only be described as porn star level aggressive vaginal intercourse. Paramedic here, your post reminds me of how little hope I have for humanity. Example, not my call but a co-worker had a call at one of the local meth/prostitute motel for a cat scratch. On the way there they were thinking this will be total bullshit. They get there, guy walks to the ambulance with large gashes on his forearms. Guy I work with is in disbelief and went in the room to check if this is like a bobcat or something, and finds a little cute cat meowing with 2 cops, and another man that was handcuffed. Medic asked how did this cat give him those large lacerations. Cop pulls medic aside and tells them both men are under arrest for animal cruelty because they tried to F the cat and the cat defended itself. Humanity is effed. Well, think of it this way. For every cat effer, there's at least one person there to arrest the cat effer. Worked labor and delivery one night. This younger, about 16 to 17, girl was in labor and had pregnancy-induced hypertension. She was in the room with her boyfriend when we heard him scream. We ran in there to find her giving him a blowjob, which isn't all that unusual in hospitals. But see, here's the thing. If blood pressure gets high enough, people will have seizures. And when people have seizures, they tend to bite down very hard. We had to basically pry this girl's mouth away from his penis. How does this happen? Hey baby, I know you're having contractions and labor complications and whatnot, but I could really use a little release, you know what I'm saying. Not a doctor or nurse, but I am a police officer. We were going to calls at a hospital for a dispute. Walking through the halls of the hospital, I heard someone yell, "Officer, help, help." I walked into the room that the yelling came from, and there was a little bald fat man masturbating violently and just looking deeply into my eyes, snickering. He tricked me. Not super strange overall, but unexpected. Labor and delivery unit saw from the main monitor at the desk that one baby's heart rate had stopped tracing on the fetal monitor. It happens sometimes with position changes during labor, so we went in to go readjust. Patient is just sitting there cleaning the just born baby off with the sheets. Looks at us like nothing is wrong. Didn't even ring her call bell. On second thought, I didn't need you guys. Thanks for the expensive hotel room. Do I get a discount for not using the staff? I'm not a doctor, but a few years ago I went to visit a friend in hospital when I walked into the wrong room and witnessed a patient peeing into their own mouth. I was so shocked I just slowly took a few steps back and quietly left his room. Edit, male. I would say his age was around 18 or 19 from my quick glance and turn. There might be a little morphine left in this urine. 15-year-old male with abdominal pain. His cardiac monitor starts stinging. VTAC looked convincing on the ghost monitor too. About 3 nurses and a doc caught him masturbating. Same thing happened during my pediatric clinical. Alarms start going off. Everyone rushes into the room and there is a 16-year-old boy absolutely mortified because he was just caught going to town on himself by 2 doctors, a handful of nurses and a nursing student. Edit. Phrasing. You jackals. I had a patient who kept pulling his IV line out because he said he couldn't get up and move around while attached to the IV pump. He had done it a couple times a shift for a couple days, and he was a hard stick. I told him he needed to use the call button to ask for help unplugging the pump, etc. if he needed to get up. I also sternly told him that, under no circumstances, was he to pull the IV out of his arm again. He needed the fluids/medications, etc. Well, a couple hours later I walked by his room and it looked like someone had been slaughtered in there. The bed was soaked with blood. Blood was spattered on the walls and the furniture, and there were pools of blood on the floor leading to the bathroom. I went into the bathroom, and there he was, standing at the sink washing his face, with blood pouring out of the IV tubing that he broke so he could get up. I quickly tied the tubing to stop the bleeding and he seemed dumbfounded about what the big deal was, looking right at me and saying, "You said not to pull the IV out of my arm, right?" We once had a patient with borderline personality disorder in the ED. He pressed the nursing call button and positioned himself standing on the end of his bed, bent over, hospital gown pulled up, bare ass facing the door. When the nurse walked in and pulled aside the curtain, the patient let out a blast of diarrhea that splattered all over the poor, shocked nurse. Not a doctor but paramedic that spent time working in the IMCU early in my career. I was monitoring patients' telemetry, basically like watching an EKG for 12 hours, and noticed our recently trached had a hole cut in his neck to allow him to breathe. Patient's heart rate was increasing, and he was having abnormalities in his EKG that were not resolving. Paged the nurse and she knocked on the door and upon entering, found his wife riding him hard. She was like a deer in headlights and then slowly backed out. It was hilarious. Definitely was not expecting the guy's wife to be having sex with him while he has a new trach. But hey, that's love. An addict injecting her own feces into her IV line so she could justify staying in the hospital longer to con someone into giving her Dilaudid. Okay, maybe this is a stupid question, but wouldn't that do some serious damage to her? Or was she not really successful with it? It is. It causes sepsis. She was in her mid-20s, addicted to narcotics and had end-stage renal disease. She died a few weeks later. Definitely walking in on a patient with the blood pressure cuff around his neck and pumping it to see how high he could get it before passing out. It was interesting to say the least. Embarrassment ensued. I had a patient with dementia who constantly carried around a Bible. Apparently, I resembled her daughter and she would call me by her daughter's name. Every time I walked into her room she would scream at me for effing that boy and hit me with her Bible. It was an interesting shift. I am a student midwife. One of the midwives I have worked with walked in on a couple having sex in a private room in an attempt to induce labor themselves before the doctors could get at them. They didn't even notice. It's okay, it's a medical procedure. You would be very surprised at how much old person effing is going on. Most of the time it's when a man is in the hospital and his wife comes to visit him. They just climb right into those beds and get freaky. God bless the horny geriatric bastards. Paramedic, Germany, not full sanitar, we take our long words seriously. Last week, get a call to pick up an elderly lady from the hospital and drive her to another hospital to get a TEP, hip replacement, put in. We walk in, she's there with a young guy she introduces as her great nephew and who helps her put her stuff together. We tell her to pack up, go get paperwork started, and I go back for her to sign the transfer papers, insurance, mostly. Knock, open, she's on the bed, playing with herself and sucking off the guy who's standing next to it on his tippy toes so he can reach her. Did a double take, told the guy that he could press the button to lower the bed so he didn't have to stand on his toes, and gave them a few more minutes. This happened to another nurse. The married father of a 12-year-old patient, who just had open heart surgery and was heavily sedated, was hitting on a nurse I work with. At 10 PM he mentioned she looked stressed and offered to massage her. She declined and laughed it off. At 12 AM she went back in the room and he tried to massage her back without asking. She told him no, in no uncertain terms, and figured that was the end of it. At 4 AM she walked in and he was standing there naked and tried to seduce her. She called security, who then called his wife, explaining to her why she had to come pick her husband up at 4 AM in the morning, and why he was no longer allowed in the hospital. I walked in on a couple in the middle of a heavy makeout session, only to later find out that they were brother and sister. That was awkward. Not me, but my mom is a nurse that works in intensive care. She told me about this one patient who wouldn't talk to anyone except for one of her co-workers, Debbie. So naturally Debbie was the one who always got this patient. When he spoke to her, he would be sincerely sweet and super nice, always trying to be a gentleman. Well, one day, Debbie wasn't there and my mom got to take care of the man. When she went to check on him he was scribbling on a notepad, and as he noticed her, he tried to hide the notebook and accidentally dropped it on the floor. My mom picked it up and as she handed it back to him, she skimmed over what he had written. For days he had been scribbling in dark, writing F Debbie, and kill Debbie, and disturbing stories about him murdering her. He was transferred to the mental ward shortly after. That's the definition of a Debbie Downer. Worked as a tech in a local hospital. One night a woman came in via ambulance in full cardiac arrest. She died a little while later. After she passed, myself and another tech were told to go make her presentable for the family. You know, remove the tubes, needles, straighten her sheets and gown. She was a larger woman, so we were bent over her going about our tasks when she moved. Not a little, a lot, as in she almost sat up. She was having post-mortem spasms. Think it's called Lazarus syndrome. Anyway, we freaked the F out and ran screaming from the room. All the doctors and nurses nearly pissed themselves laughing. Thankfully the family had not arrived. Two teenage girls in a children's hospital for sickle cell were in the same room together and were discussing the nice things their pimp bought them. One girl had received a nice handbag and the other one had received something less nice. They then, after more discussion of their pimps, realized they had the same pimp, causing the girl who got worse things to try and steal the other's handbag, saying that she deserved it more or something. This led to them fighting and pulling out each other's central lines. Bloody mess. But one of my favorite stories. Got to love Oakland. I'm a hospital chaplain. I was sitting at the nurse's station in the cardiac ICU, and we kept hearing rhythmic thumping coming from one of the patient's rooms. When we entered, we saw the patient sitting on the edge of his bed with his Foley bag in his hand. It was still inserted. Upon asking what he was up to, he told us he was fishing. Then he tossed the Foley catheter bag away from him across the room. When it hit the end of the tubing, it stopped and fell to the floor, noticeably jerking his penis underneath his gown, at which point he pulled it back in, like a fishing line, and proceeded to repeat. The nurse, a grizzled old Navy vet, chuckled and asked how the fishing was. Good. The nurse tells him to stop or he'll hurt himself. He doesn't really want to, but eventually we talk him into it. After we get him back in bed, the nurse asks if he has any pain. The patient responds that he never felt better. As far as I know, he didn't go back to his fishing though. Altered people do strange stuff, but at least he didn't rip it out or do any serious damage. TLDR, patient in ICU believes he is fishing, throws Foley bag, still attached to the Foley catheter that he has inserted, to try and catch fish. Edit, wow gold. Thanks, kind Redditor. That's a first for me. This is where I close Reddit and look for something else to do. Wanna go fish? Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more daily Reddit videos.